Hello, I'm Caroline Marshall, and welcome to Bump to Business Owner, the podcast speaking to mums in business, you. I'll be in conversation with some of the most inspiring women and mothers in enterprise about their journey, how they created their successful businesses alongside raising their children, and what that looks like in work and family life. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Bump to Business Owner. Today is another solo mini-sode and I am going to be talking about imposter syndrome. I'm so not an expert, but what I'm going to talk about is just a little bit about what it is, why I'm talking about it today, my journey on reflecting on potentially my own imposter syndrome, and ways to support it. But I am no expert, so of course I have used ChatGPT for this part of the podcast. If that's not good enough for you, do let me know and I'll look at getting an expert in on imposter syndrome for one of our guest episodes of Bump to Business Owner. So what is imposter syndrome? It's really interesting, and what I find so interesting about this is that actually I was listening to an episode of Diary of a CEO with Trini from Trini London, or Trini and Susanna if you're like me from back in the day, and she totally dismisses imposter syndrome, saying it doesn't exist. I was like, yeah, I don't think it does either. And then I tell you my little bit of reflection on this. Well, firstly, it clearly does exist, because KPMG study says that, I think the study was done in 2023, 75% of female executives across industries have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their career. And there was another study done in, I think it is 2022-23, I got this from, 4,000 adults found 53% of women have experienced this feeling of unfounded self-doubt, incompetence, and just being underqualified. And in comparative to a majority of men, over half of men said they have never felt it at all. And actually, and this is it with women as well, that was women in the workplace, 53% women have experienced it, where it was actually 72% of women have felt it in general, whereas over half men haven't felt it at all. So it's interesting to see there's definitely an imbalance there according to these studies and from what I hear from lived experience in women. The reason I bring this up as well is because I went to a really great event with Female Founders Rise, led by Emmy Faust. I probably speak about them quite a lot on socials, but a really good community to be a part of. And they did a whole session on this because there were some fantastic women there that did a study on imposter syndrome, and they asked people to put their hands up who felt they had felt imposter syndrome. I think this might have been in particular with their business lives, business career and business ownership lives, a lot of female founders in the room. So I believe imposter syndrome is probably rife with self-employed people or mothers, potentially, as this is a podcast for both. But I stood next to a woman who was like, it doesn't exist. And I was like, she's like, it's not imposter syndrome, it's something else. I was like, okay, interesting. We've probably been listening to the same podcast. And I think my journey with it was that I started to think about, okay, imposter syndrome, listen to what the symptoms were, listen to how it transpires, what really is imposter syndrome. And what was interesting about it was how it represents. So one part that really picked my ears is that need to be over prepared. So I listened to how it represented, how people felt it. And I think, well, in general, if people are feeling like this, you can't just say it doesn't exist. I just don't believe in that. My whole journey was self-healing and thinking, okay, well, you clearly don't feel like that. That's basically telling a postpartum mother, no, you don't feel like this. It's just baby blues. So I've decided that is absolute. I'm sorry, Trini, big fan of yours and your business, but I really don't feel the way to go about this is rejecting it. Because also, and the reason I probably rejected it was actually, I've not felt it in my business. I don't believe I have felt imposter syndrome. And it was actually when I first said it out loud, me and my husband were chatting. He had a while where he got quite senior in quite a large organization. He was like, I have definitely felt imposter syndrome. It was before I'd even been to this Female Founders Rise event. He was like, I've definitely had imposter syndrome. And I was like, no, I don't think I get imposter syndrome. And this is my husband who knows the US was like, no, I don't think you do. And it was really interesting. And actually, I think I've now reflected on why in my business I don't get it. So after this event, after I'd listened to how it transpires, how it can make you feel, I realized I have indeed definitely had imposter syndrome, but it was back in my earlier, younger years when I wanted to be a singer. And I really felt I didn't know anything. Everyone was better than me. And it wasn't a bad way that I was jealous of them or anything like that. It was just on my self-confidence and belief in myself. I really felt I just wasn't ever good enough. And I even think when I went to university to study music, I realised I was just, I mean, there's a lot of feelings on going to uni. There's a lot of other things going on wider there. But when it came to going to university to study music, I just assumed everyone in the class would be better than me. Everyone would know what they're doing. Everyone would be more confident. And I don't know whether it was also, I had a really unusual, excellent GCSE and A-level group where lots of people I knew in music had gone off to music college or Oxbridge and done really well. So maybe I had come from a place of high standards. But what I thought was a really interesting symptom of imposter syndrome is over preparing and feeling like you're never prepared enough. And that was definitely something I used to do in my days of singing. I used to run through lines in my head. I think it also really damaged me in the fact I could never be present with a lot of things because I was constantly thinking about that, constantly worried about my voice. If my voice was going to be good enough, could I control it? Could I keep it under control? Whole load of issues there. But I think in one area of this was that imposter syndrome. And then I started to kind of free myself of that imposter syndrome when I came out of it. And by the way, I'm not sharing this story saying, but maybe you shouldn't be doing business ownership if that's what you're feeling in it. But I think it was really, really good for me to identify the symptoms. And when I come to ChatGPT in a minute, that's one of the first things it advises you to do. So actually, AI is great. And also with something like my business, I think I literally saw an Instagram post the other day about literally there was someone out there who is not as qualified as you, doesn't know as much as you, doing exactly the same thing as you. So why are you worrying about your experience and qualifications? And that was what interested me. And I think this is why I don't get it in my business, because I literally worked for men who were 10 years younger than me, who quite frankly were no position other than the privilege they had with their upbringing and backgrounds to be leading a company like a VA agency with a bunch of experienced women and doing quite well at it. And when I say well, doing surface level well, there was a lot wrong with the culture in the company, but surface level, if you looked at turnover, looked at success stories for some of their clients, they were doing well. And I'm like, literally, if they can do it, so can I. So maybe that's why I've never had it in my business. So that is my own personal lived tip with imposter syndrome. And I probably shouldn't say that, but it is true. And I have definitely worked. And I also think sometimes there's a really great podcast where this hugely successful woman on Diary of a CEO came on and said, I've been in a room with all the top leaders. And I'm like, you? Really, you? And I feel like sometimes that's a privilege we get as a PA. We get to be around great leaders and we get to be ones who are really just blagging it. And so that's my also PA perspective for you, from someone who gets to see a lot more of these leaders, that a lot of people are just blagging it. I shouldn't say that either. But they are, and the good part is we can all do better, learn more, do more. But I definitely saw, say, for an example of this in my work career, I'm like, okay, now I know I have experienced imposter syndrome. Am I sure I've not had it in business? Because I think that's a really good question to ask yourself, and ask myself for the prep of this podcast. And so one thing I came to as well when I came to do some speaking earlier this year at the PA show, it's the first time I've ever really spoken like this, done anything like that. And key things came back. I really over-prepared. And my husband could see it in me, my family could. I was just it took over my life for a bit of a week. And I don't think I had imposter syndrome, but I think just some of those symptoms were showing of the over preparing. And I think that's quite a feminine thing to do in business, because we still feel like we're trying to keep up, is to over prepare. And so that was an interesting thing. And I think that's a good thing to check on, because I think that was nerves. I don't actually think that was imposter syndrome. I don't think I didn't belong there with my experience and levels. I think I just saw this as my first time and I wanted to do well. And so I do think that is an important question to ask. Is this imposter syndrome, or is this just nerves? And I can work on that, get some support, get some help, or try and reframe it as excitement, because we now know, like, there's studies, but isn't it? Excitement and nerves are exactly the same actual feeling, apparently. So I thought that would be really helpful to share, is that my journey, is it nerves or is it excitement? And I had a really big interview, something I still can't talk about because I'm still kind of going through this process for something I was thinking about doing next year for my business that would potentially be really good. And I slipped right back into those habits in the interview of like, oh, this, they actually know about business, unlike me, and it's just not true. And I think potentially there was probably a little bit more of imposter syndrome coming out in that interview, because there was some people hugely experienced on this call interviewing me, and I didn't really know what I was going into. And I think it's just understanding how you can support yourself during that. And that's what led me on to asking ChatGPT. Well, I don't really know, because I quit singing and I quit the thing that I had imposter syndrome in. So how do you overcome it without quitting? But I do think that's a good story there, because maybe something not is always right for you. But if you're running your own business, definitely don't quit it. That's not what I'm saying. And I thought this was an excellent point of view, is recognizing it's normal. And if anyone there, I've told you, I was in this room at Female Founders Rise, and most women put their hand up of having imposter syndrome. And the rest of them would probably listen to Trini London and says it doesn't exist. So recognizing it's normal and it does exist. It's a thing, imposter syndrome. And you're, as a woman, you're more likely to get it, and that's okay. And you, unlike me, who clearly got it when they were 18, you just get it later in life because you've never run a business before, maybe, or maybe you've had it throughout your life and just not really recognized it. Own your success. Great advice. I'm all for that. It's not an accident. I think I can even slip into that. It's a bit like, oh, I'm so lucky. And actually, my content writer, when they've been like, I think I did this with PR. I'm like, really lucky I got some of this PR. And she was like, well, you kind of worked for that. And and it is. Let's not always dismiss things as luck. Sometimes it might be luck that I found £5 on the floor. That's luck. It's not luck that you got your clients, that you knew where to find them, that you were a nice person, so people recommended you. That isn't luck. So own your success. Reframe your inner dialogue. I love that. That little voice that's telling you, I'm not good enough. I don't belong here. And that is not what your brain isn't telling you. A lot of what I've learned on my journey the past 4 years is your brain tells you a lot of crap and it's just not helpful, so dismiss it. And also, I'm doing this after I've just come off a call with Dr. Joe Carlisle, and it's natural that we're afraid of change and our brain is like trying to keep us safe. So there may be things that your brain is telling you just to try and keep you safe, to stop you from putting yourself out there, and that's just your brain, that's not you. So just tell it to be quiet and just carry on and do some power poses in the mirror. Oh, I didn't get this from ChatGPT, but I'm going to bring this up. Like do some like strong arms, or just, hype yourself up in the mirror. I love that sort of thing. And embody feeling confident. I love that. And put away that inner dialogue. Surround yourself with support. I'm obviously going to be a huge fan of this one. So finding other female founders, mentors, fellow mums. ChatGPT knows who it's talking to now. It always says this to me. I don't think I mentioned motherhood at all in my question. I said fellow mums, you get it. It really likes me to hype up my mum crew. So like I said, I get it. I get imposter syndrome. I've clearly been on a journey of denying it was a thing and then realizing I had it. So if someone like me can learn that, I haven't had it in my business, but I know I've been in a room with them. So maybe, try and find networking events like I have where they're talking about it and it's actually a thing. And I'm going to try and find some handy links and resources. Please message me as well if you want me to dive into this more with a guest who actually knows what they're talking about versus me. Also, talk of imposter syndrome. Don't actually know much about it, and I'm still recording a whole podcast on it. So therefore, anyone who actually knows something about it, record a podcast on imposter syndrome. Embrace discomfort. Love that. I think that's it as well. Like maybe you had a really comfortable career pre-motherhood and doing a business, like if you've never done, I'm there with that, never created a social media account that's public, and having to do that with Upsource was so uncomfortable. And now like 4 years later, I still get uncomfortable with it, but it's just part of what I do. Focus on your why. I love this. ChatGPT is so good. Yeah, I've been really doing so much work on my why recently, and it's all been coming about to community, the assistant world, not just this. I think it's quite clear my why with the podcast, but my why for my revenue generating business, what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And when I ever have doubts, because I obviously, while it might not be imposter syndrome, I obviously do have doubts as a business owner, When I ever have doubts, I come back to why I'm doing this, and it's got so clear this past year or even just the past month on why I'm doing this and some things I've put in place just to enhance my why. So go back to you. If you're doing, you know what you're doing, so whether it's just making money for your whole family, or adding the income to your family, or literally having a deeper why of wanting to help others, like, just remember that and keep coming to it. And then the last one, get professional help when needed. Having just recorded the Dr. Joe Carlisle episode, listen to that if you haven't, because me and her are huge fans on not doing this alone. And if you're really struggling with imposter syndrome, I get it. I look back on 18-year-old me and kind of want to give her a little bit of a hug, because it is literally like, trust me, no one is doing anything musical, I think, after my music degree. So clearly none of us knew what we were doing. I still had the biggest imposter syndrome. Some of them might be teachers, so I will give all those people that went on to be teachers, they definitely knew what they were doing on my degree versus me. Still got a 2-1. So yeah, that is my thing on imposter syndrome. I'm sorry I had to get ChatGPT help on this, but if I've literally got ChatGPT to help me on half an episode of a podcast, you can do what you're doing. And I'm just going to enhance, get help, find your community. I think those are great tips. And actually, I wish I had done that for 18-year-old me. So have you experienced imposter syndrome? Do you feel comfortable talking about it? If so, please do DM me on Instagram at bumptobusinessowner or Caroline at bumptobusinessowner.com. And also, please, leave me a note if you'd love me to get an actual expert on this on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening to Bump to Business Owner. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please do rate, review, follow, or subscribe wherever you're listening. It really helps us to connect with more mums and business owners. You can DM me on @BumpToBusinessOwner on Instagram, and I'll be back next week.